Hello everyone and welcome back to Dissecting Dimensions, a series of videos made by yours truly breaking down every single franchise represented inside LEGO Dimensions. In the last video I covered the basic starter pack that is necessary to play the game and the central story mode, and now in this video we will be picking back up where I left off by diving into the very first media franchise that is featured in the game, that of course being DC Comics. Now, as a casual Detective Comics fan, I can say that I have enough familiarity with this brand that I did not need to do very much research prior to writing this video. I'm well aware of what the Justice League is, and have kept up with some of the DC Comics focused films that Warner Brothers has been creating over the last 20 years or so. In fact, some of my favorite DC Comics related media includes the 2000s Justice League and Justice League Unlimited cartoon, the original Teen Titans cartoon, the Christopher Nolan Dark Knight trilogy, Batman 1989, the Harley Quinn animated series, the Batman Arkham games, Shazam, DC Universe Online, Injustice. While my preference for superhero content lies in their arch-rival competitor, I cannot deny that I enjoy my fair share of DC content as well, but judging by everything I just listed off, most of my familiarity has some connection to Batman in one way or another. Now, I used to say that Shazam was my favorite DC Comics hero, and on many days that's still true, but in recent times I think Batman has once again surpassed him into my #1 spot, mostly because of his rogues gallery. Between villains such as the Riddler, Penguin, Poison Ivy, obviously the Joker, Two-Face, and even Killer Croc, yeah, he's got one of the most iconic set of evildoers to go up against, likely only rivaled by Spider-Man, personally speaking. Of course, I'm not here to argue one way or the other because I enjoy both quite well. Now, the history of DC Comics is a long and winding story that I don't have time to go super in-depth into with this video, but the basic information one would need to know is that Detective Comics is one of the oldest American comic companies in existence, having published over tens of thousands of comics since its founding in 1934. The company was originally started by its founder Malcolm Wheeler Nicholson as National Allied Publications, an independent American comic book publishing company that eventually had a second branch extend off of it known as Detective Comics Incorporated before the two were ultimately merged together into DC Comics in 1946. And that name has stuck around ever since. Pioneered by some of the most famous superhero characters in history, DC Comics would continue to grow over the next several decades as they gained more and more momentum from its consumers. DC Comics was eventually purchased by Warner Brothers in 1969 and has continued to operate under their ownership as one of the largest branches of the company's media entertainment up through the release of LEGO Dimensions and beyond. Obviously, its history runs a lot deeper than that, but that's just about the gist of what you need to know. They're a company that makes comic books featuring some of the most famous superheroes of all time. So now that we've gone over a brief history of what DC Comics is, now let's go ahead and get into the content that was released for LEGO Dimensions. Right off the bat, I just want to establish that DC Comics just so happens to be the most represented franchise in the entire game without question. Between the sheer number of characters that are available to purchase across the various different fun packs and team packs, to the fact that Batman is one of the main characters in the starter pack. Also, we can't forget the fact that in practically every single story level almost, you end up fighting a DC character in some sort of boss fight. That makes it pretty apparent to me that DC Comics had a lot of love put its way. Not that I'm saying that's a bad thing, but compared to most other franchises in the game, this one is just undeniably obvious with how much attention it gets. Now, I have a theory on why this is, but take this with a grain of salt because I don't know for sure. My hypothesis tells me that because LEGO Batman 2 and LEGO Batman 3 were both successful games that Traveler's Tales had already released prior to LEGO Dimensions, they took some liberties and recycled a lot of the content that was featured in those games into this one. I do own both of these titles, although I have not played them yet, so I cannot speak from personal experience. However, I know for a fact that the boss fight with the Joker during the Simpsons level of story mode features a robot mech that was taken directly from LEGO Batman 2 because even Batman himself comments on having seen it before. Also, as you'll come to find out during the character bios, all of these characters featured in Dimensions were originally in LEGO Batman 2 and 3 prior to this, which means all of their models and such was recycled as well. I just have this sinking suspicion based on what I've observed already that a lot of the content featured here for DC Comics specifically isn't that original after all. Now, whether or not you would consider that a bad thing is another issue entirely, but seeing as I myself have not played either of those games, I don't really have the perspective of how different or similar the things featured in Dimensions are compared to those other two titles. Regardless, I did want to bring it up because it is worth noting that DC Comics had a lot of love put towards it. I'm not sure if that was the developers, Traveler's Tales, making that call, or if it was the Warner Brothers executives that were pushing for it. Like I said, I'm not quite sure, and I really don't know. However, regardless of that fact, as I said, there are a whopping 10 playable characters in LEGO Dimensions that are all based around DC Comics. But thankfully, most of these characters are not required for 100% completion as a result. So, at the very least, you don't necessarily need to obtain all of them in order to be able to play the game to maximum completion. As I mentioned in my story mode video, I did go out of my way to get the toy tags for them regardless, and I will be showing off each and every one in their respective character bios as we go along in the video. With that said, let's go ahead and just dive right into the first released DC Comics character, not including Batman, which I already covered in the starter kit video, that of course being Wonder Woman. Wonder Woman was initially created in 1941 by William Marston and premiered in All-Star Comics issue number 8, which he had written the script for. From there, her status and reputation gradually grew as she gained more and more of a following. Wonder Woman is an Amazonian who grew up on the island of Themyscira as the daughter of their queen, Hippolyta. Through her years, she trained to become a powerful and skilled Amazonian warrior who left her island to defend and assist the world of man, which she had done by joining the Justice League as one of its primary members. Wonder Woman is voiced by none other than the well-revered voice actress Laura Bailey herself in this game, who has taken on so many notable roles stemming from Black Widow in various Marvel-related media, to Blaze the Cat, to Abby in The Last of Us 2, to my personal favorite being one of the boss's voices in Saints Row 3, 4, and Get Out of Hell. Now, in LEGO Dimensions, as with all of these DC characters, Wonder Woman would theoretically be used to unlock the DC Comics adventure world, but because Batman is a mandatory character needed to play through story mode, this does not apply to any of them. She also does not possess any unique abilities, making her an entirely optional playable character. However, just because a character is not required to 100% the game does not mean there isn't a reason to consider getting them anyways. In Wonder Woman's case specifically, she comes with a pretty good selection of character abilities. Invulnerability for starters. You know the typical invincibility extra that's available as a red brick in most other LEGO games? Well, if you played one, you know that. That red brick is not present in Dimensions. Instead, it is an attribute only applied to specific characters. Wonder Woman just so happens to be one of those characters, meaning she cannot take any damage from anything in the game whatsoever. So, if you ever need a character to breeze through a level with without having to worry about dealing with enemies or losing studs, she's a great option for that. Wonder Woman also comes with the ability to fly, as one would expect, although interestingly enough, she also has the acrobat movement ability too, despite the fact that she can't actually double jump because her flight overrides it. She's still able to swing around poles to reach higher places and wall jump, but she does not have an extra mid-air jump. She also has the ability to dive, which allows her to swim underwater, and she can use her tiara as a boomerang, similar to how Batman can throw his batarang. Her character accessory is her Lasso of Truth, which in-game grants her the mind control ability that can be used to allow the player to take control of other NPC characters to solve puzzles, as well as use it as a grapple when needed. Her bracelets act as laser deflectors as well, and of course she has super strength, which is sorta a given, granting her the ability to smash cracked barriers and pick up super strength handles. Wonder Woman also comes with a vehicle inside her fun pack, her iconic invisible jet. This vehicle can also be upgraded into the laser shooter and torpedo bomber as well, but sticking true to its name, the invisible jet, believe it or not, has the ability to turn invisible by pressing the circle button when no other special is equipped. Some fun trivia regarding Wonder Woman in LEGO Dimensions is that her costume variant is actually that of the one she wears in LEGO Batman 2, and her 1970s Wonder Woman theme also plays every time she flies through the air. Every single time. It's novel at first when you fly around as her for the first couple of times, but similar to the Sonic Unleashed Werehog battle theme, you get real sick of hearing that opening riff over and over again, I tell you what. So, if you don't want the Adventure World soundtrack interrupted by this song every single time you fly through the air, I would choose a different character in that situation. I really wish there was an option to turn it off, but unfortunately there's not. Otherwise though, she's a fun character, and I recommend her despite not being necessary for 100% completion. And next up we have Cyborg, who was also released in Wave 1 at the same time as Wonder Woman. Cyborg, aka Victor Stone, was an ordinary high school football player who suffered a life-threatening physical injury that he was only saved from because his father was able to replace his physical body parts with these cybernetic machine parts, essentially turning him into a half-man, half-robot vessel. The character of Cyborg was originally created by Marv Wolfman and George Perez in 1980, who first appeared in a special insert of DC Comics Presents issue number 26. In LEGO Dimensions, Cyborg is voiced by Bumper Robinson, most well known for voicing Cyborg in various media, as well as Falcon on the Marvel Comics side of things. Cyborg as a character lacks any unique or defining abilities that sets him apart from most other characters in this game, however, he still has a decent arsenal of moves to work with. He can shoot targets with his stud shooter, which is also his accessory, allowing him to access doors and panels when applicable, and he comes equipped with the laser ability as well, which can melt through golden objects. He can also melt down ice using a similar move, and he is capable of using these laser abilities underwater because he has the dive ability as well. This gives him more versatility as a character because not all characters that can perform the laser and melt ice abilities can do so underwater. However, this combination of criteria only amounts to super situational moments that are few and far between in game, plus this combination is carried by a few other characters, including some more DC ones. I think Cyborg's most interesting ability comes with his transformation upgrade, which allows him to grow bigger in size, granting him faster movement speed, super strength, and the ability to pick up and throw large boulders. I will say that most hulking, brutish characters in LEGO games play identical to one another, so this by itself isn't too special, but when you consider his ability to use lasers and interact with technology to solve certain puzzles, it's not a bad combo to utilize. One of the most ideal ways to play LEGO Dimensions is to have as many abilities available to you at a time on as few characters as possible, because you can only have up to 7 characters maximum on the field. Credit where credit is due, Cyborg's vehicle is also pretty fun to run around in given its high power and speed. Its base form is known as the Cyber Guard, but it has 2 upgradable modes in the form of the Cyber Wrecker and the Laser Robot Walker. Plus, one of the alternate skins for his vehicle is the Teen Titans design variation, which is pretty neat. What I don't understand, however, is why on earth Cyborg doesn't have the hacking ability. This dude hacks into computer systems all the time, and yet he is incapable of doing so in this game. I don't understand the thinking behind that omission, but it is one that I wholeheartedly disagree with. As some other side notes, Cyborg's appearance is based on his New 52 variation in this game, and the theme that plays on his character screen within Vorton is actually the 2001 Justice League theme song, despite the fact that Cyborg never actually showed up in that animated series. Not sure why that is, but it's a fun little goof nonetheless. And so that brings us to the Joker and Harley Quinn, who were released together as a team pack in Wave 3 of LEGO Dimensions. The Joker in particular dates all the way back to 1940 when the debut issue of Batman first released to the public. While the character's true creator is unknown, credit is shared between Bill Finger, Bob Kane, and Jerry Robinson, who all seem to have a hand in turning the character into Batman's archenemy. In LEGO Dimensions, the Joker is voiced by Christopher Corey Smith, who also reprises his role from LEGO Batman 2 and 3. I'm starting to notice a recurring theme here with the voice cast of DC characters in particular. Now that I think about it, I wonder if this is considered canon to those games. The Joker is also one of the few story mode boss characters that are actually playable, although ability-wise he's not that interesting. He can use his Tommy gun to shoot at targets as most characters with ranged projectile weapons can, that's his accessory by the way, and he can grapple certain objects when needed. Other than that, his only other traits are his hazard resistance to things like puddles of acid on the ground, and his ability to generate electricity. His associated vehicle is his very own chopper, which can later be upgraded into the mischievous missile blaster and the lock and laser jet. Other than that though, the Joker doesn't have that much going for him as a character, truth be told. Similar to Batman, I was kinda hoping for more from him in this game. And making up the other half of this team pack, as I mentioned, is Miss Harley Quinn herself. Now, believe it or not, the character of Harley Quinn actually only got her start in the 1990s, unlike most of these characters that have been around for much, much longer, even elevating to the status of getting her own movies and animated series despite having initially been designated as the Joker's sidekick. She originally got her start in Batman the Animated Series of all places, as co-creators Paul Dini and Bruce Timm introduced her as a comic relief love interest side character to complement and contrast the Joker during his evil scheming. Since then, Quinn has been established to be a part of many other comic runs, such as being a member of the Gotham Sirens and having heavy involvement with the Suicide Squad. And I bet you'll never guess who voices Harley Quinn in LEGO Dimensions. Yep, it's Tara Strong, returning from LEGO Batman 3. Although, of course, she's voiced Harley Quinn in many other things too, whether it be the Arkham games or Injustice or several animated television shows. Speaking as an avid Tara Strong fan, I'm glad she's here voicing another one of her most iconic characters in LEGO Dimensions. Simple as that. Unfortunately though, similar to the Joker, her move pool isn't exactly the best. She has her stapled oversized hammer for most melee attacks at the very least and is her signature accessory, plus she has acrobatics capabilities given her nimbleness, but other than that she just has super strength and nothing else. She's also a very underwhelming character to roam around as, but at the very least she comes with her Quinn-mobile, which makes getting around places a bit faster. This vehicle can also be upgraded into the Quinn Ultra Racer and the missile launcher when enough upgrades are pumped into it. Sadly, however, this makes the Joker and Harley Quinn team pack one of the worst character packs in all of LEGO Dimensions. I am confident in saying that this is true for it being the worst team pack in general, which is a shame because both of these characters could have been really fun to play as. Regardless, I wouldn't recommend going after either of these two as I really don't see any advantages that are made available by having them. Just skip them, honestly. It's a bird. It's a plane. No, it's Superman. Because of course we can't have a DC Comics adventure world without the Man of Steel himself. Clark Kent, aka Superman, is a shining beacon of hope for the people of Earth. Hailing from the planet Krypton, which was attacked when he was only an infant, Kal-El was sent away into space by his parents and eventually landed on planet Earth, where he was discovered by his adoptive parents, Ma and Pa Kent. They took in Kal-El at their farm, gave him the name Clark, and raised him as their own son, teaching him about optimism and good and how Santa Claus is real. Superman was first conceptualized in the 1930s by duo Jerry Siegel and Joe Shuster, who spent several years developing the character before they ever became successful. Superman was not only a hit, he was an icon. He defined the term superhero and has been a wild success ever since, seeing as he is right up there with Batman as Detective Comics' most iconic characters. The LEGO Dimensions incarnation of Superman is voiced by another established voice actor, Travis Willingham, known for his work as Thor in several Marvel projects and media, Knuckles the Echidna from Sonic the Hedgehog, and my personal favorite, Satan from Saints Row: Get Out of Hell. He absolutely kills that role. He has a pretty bold and triumphant take on Superman, one that I think emulates the character pretty well, and he returns from the previous LEGO Batman games as one can pretty much expect by this point. Will there ever be an actor here that doesn't? As far as Superman's abilities go, he's got some shared traits between other heroes we've already discussed, but has a fair share of new ones as well. He is, of course, invulnerable, just like Wonder Woman, but he has the added catch of just being able to walk through objects and destroy them on contact, making him incredibly fun to just run around as when you need to destroy a bunch of objects in a room. And as expected, he's got his ability to fly, shoot lasers from his eyes, and dive underwater. Interestingly enough, Superman actually has an almost unique ability that is only shared by two other characters, that being Ice Breath. Yes, another one of Superman's most iconic abilities is his ability to freeze anything simply by exhaling, which can be used to both put out fires and stop enemies in their tracks. Furthermore, Superman can also use his X-ray vision to see through walls and obstacles, which is necessary in order to complete a few puzzles scattered throughout the game. He also comes with his trusty vehicle, the Hover Pod, which can be upgraded into the Krypton Striker and the Super Stealth Pod. Although strangely enough, no accessory for some reason. Truth be told, I find Superman to be my favorite DC character to play as right alongside Wonder Woman, and I promise it's not just because the invincibility completely breaks the game. I just find the versatility of moves plus the flight to be super convenient when it comes to navigating around the adventure world. And speaking of, just like Wonder Woman, Superman's iconic theme song plays every time you fly in the air as him. So once again, while it may be cool at first, it quickly grows old and is the most immediate drawback to choosing to play as him frequently. Other than that, though, despite not being needed for completion, I can still recommend him as a character, especially as something a kid could rely on in case they get stuck at a certain part and need help getting past something because they keep dying on it or something like that. Following suit comes Aquaman. Denizen of the deep as the trusty king of Atlantis, Arthur Curry is yet another member of the Justice League who was originally created in the 1930s and 40s era, having first appeared in More Fun Comics issue number 73. Although he didn't earn his own solo run until the 1960s, believe it or not. Aquaman is voiced by Brian Bloom in LEGO Dimensions though, once again, the actor returning from the previous LEGO Batman games, with some of his most notable voiceover work being in other video games like Mass Effect as Simon Atwell and the main protagonist of the Wolfenstein series, William Blazkowicz. I'm sorry if I butchered that, I've only played Wolfenstein 2 once in my life. Aquaman's in-game capabilities don't run too deep here though. Obviously it's a given that he's able to dive since, you know, he's the king of Atlantis, but his true signature ability comes in the form of his Atlantean ability as variations of elemental and creature-like objects spawns whenever he uses it. And up until Wave 9, Aquaman was the only character in the entire game capable of performing this move, making him near mandatory to play the game to 100%. Of course, given his association with water, he can also use the water spray ability to spray other characters and objects with water, clean up hazards, and water plants to allow them to grow. It's a pretty versatile ability despite not being too great combat-wise, and definitely comes in handy over the course of the game. Aquaman's vehicle is the Aqua Watercraft, by the way, which can be upgraded into the Seven Seas Speeder and the Trident of Fire when enough buffs have been purchased for it. And of course, one final note is that Aquaman does come with an accessory, unlike Superman, with his iconic trident, because he wouldn't be the king of Atlantis without it. As a swimming character, he is the best option out of the DC franchise, so I can give him that much at least. It's a very light recommendation though, I wouldn't prioritize him over other mandatory characters that are just as capable as he is when it comes to diving underwater. Bane, for one reason or another, has become one of Batman's signature villains in more recent times despite initially premiering in 1993. He was created by Chuck Dixon, Doug Mensch, and Graham Nolan, and is typically depicted as not only a brute force to be reckoned with, but also a highly intelligent individual at that. He's got brains and brawn. Mostly due to Tom Hardy's portrayal of him in Christopher Nolan's The Dark Knight Rises, Bane has become one of the most popular Batman villains that, personally speaking, I don't find all that special. Although Tom Hardy's voice modifier was certainly iconic and continues to get referenced in other Batman-related media years later, Bane isn't all that special in this game, having been released in Wave 5 of LEGO Dimensions, seeing as his only capabilities here are his resistance to hazardous materials such as toxic chemicals and acid, which the Joker already has, and his ability to transform into a hulking brute, which grants him super strength to pick up heavier objects and throw them, plus added combat speed and range, something that Cyborg already has. He doesn't come with a character accessory, and his vehicle isn't that particularly special either, that being the drill driver, which can be upgraded into the dig and drill and the drill and blast. He's ultimately a redundant character that has no unique attributes and is ultimately the least recommendable DC character out of the entire bunch, even less than the Joker and Harley Quinn, because at least the Joker has the electricity ability. Now, it is worth noting that Bane is voiced by the well-regarded Steve Bloom, being most famously known for, well, good God, just look at his IMDb page. You've definitely heard this man's voice before, whether you remember it or not. Alas, great voiceover performance aside, I cannot recommend this character pack in any good faith. I would just skip out on him if I were you. And this brings us to the remaining two DC superhero characters, Green Arrow and Supergirl. These two superheroes are particularly special because aside from the story mode stars, Gandalf and Wildstyle, they are the only playable characters in the entire game to release without a vehicle companion. In fact, they're some of the rarest characters in the entire game because they were each released in event-exclusive polybags in the year 2016, which, in my opinion, was a bit stupid because it severely limited the number of people who were able to acquire said character for their collections. But I suppose such is the nature of collect-em-all toy lines like this, so I can't say I'm surprised. Something's gotta be the rarest figure. Still, thankfully he's an unnecessary character, so nobody is hurting from not having him in their collection when it comes to finishing LEGO Dimensions in full. In fact, he's just an ordinary Archer character. For what it's worth, the character of Oliver Queen, aka Green Arrow, was first established in 1941 in the same exact issue as Aquaman. More Fun Comics number 73. He was created by Mort Weisinger and George Papp, and although he has been around for about as long as previously acknowledged DC characters, it's pretty safe to say it was thanks to the CW's television series Arrow that he exploded into the limelight during the 2010s decade. Green Arrow is actually remarkably underwhelming in-game, however, as he has zero signature abilities and only a limited few at that. So he is 100% optional and I wouldn't have had it any other way. If he was required to beat the game, that would be absolutely absurd, so at the very least I'm grateful for that. Still, his abilities consist of acrobatics, which many other characters possess, he can shoot targets and grapple, and he can use the pole vault ability when necessary. That's it. That's all he's got. Okay, he can obviously shoot arrows with his bow, but there's not much versatility with that because he can only fire regular shots and charge down for a 3-arrow spread shot, but it's nothing to write home about, especially when there are other characters in the game, like Legolas, who possess the exact same thing and are far easier to come across. Ollie is voiced by Chris Hardwick in this game, who had previously voiced him in The Batman, the animated series. Regardless, seeing as Green Arrow is such a hard-to-find character and yet he doesn't bring anything new to the game, I wouldn't advise going for it. You're not missing anything. And as I just mentioned, Supergirl was the other special polybag promotional character that was only available at select locations for a limited time, although she was also included in starter packs at one point, but those rapidly became difficult to find. Supergirl, aka Kara Zor-El, is Superman's cousin, also from Krypton, first appeared in 1959's Action Comics number 252, and was created by Otto Binder, or Binder, and Al Plastino. As for her voice actress, why, she's played by Kari Wahlgren, also known for doing work on Rick and Morty as several characters including Jessica, Zatanna in DC Superhero Girls, and a whole slew of video games. Supergirl, as one may already assume, is an identical clone of Superman in this game, so copy-paste everything I said for Superman here as it is the exact same thing. However, what really defines Supergirl as a character in this game and what ultimately makes her the better choice between the two is her Red Lantern transformation ability, which adds even more moves to her arsenal. While in Red Lantern form, Supergirl now gains access to the dig and grapple abilities, as well as her interactivity with LEGO constructs. Something possessed only by her and other Wave 9 characters, allowing her to create objects with her Red Lantern ring in order to complete tasks. Ultimately though, similar to Aquaman, these Wave 9 characters result in Supergirl's status being demoted to 100% optional, which is fine by me given how rare she is to find. Single-handedly the most expensive character from the entire game. I am not about to admit how much I paid for just the toy tag, let alone what her entire character is worth. I should mention that Supergirl also does not have an accessory just like Superman, nor does she have a vehicle, seeing as she was only released in a polybag or as part of the base starter pack. If you can manage to snag a hold of her, she is definitely one of the most versatile characters in the entire game, so I can recommend her on that front. However, she is not easy to come by, so I don't blame you if you decide to skip out. Even with her versatility, it's still not justified by the price. Now, since I was unsure of where the best place to discuss this topic in my story mode video was, I've decided that I am instead going to be including brief blurbs on every story mode level that pertains to a particular franchise in their respective videos before I tackle the adventure world. As one may infer from that statement, DC Comics did have a story mode level dedicated to it, consisting of Batman, Gandalf, and Wildstyle trying to prevent Lord Sauron from taking over Metropolis. Within the level itself, the characters run around Metropolis as they solve puzzles and get through the chaos to encounter Two-Face in a mini-boss battle before taking on Lord Sauron himself atop the Daily Planet in one of my favorite boss battles in the entire story mode. Within every LEGO Dimensions stage, there consists of the following collectibles: a Citizen in Peril, 10 mini-kits, and a Rule Breaker meter, which all award the player with a single gold brick for the completion of each objective. The Rule Breaker status in particular is solely dependent upon the amount of studs you collect, with this stage in particular requiring a rule breaker amount of 125,000 studs. The Citizen in Peril of this level also just so happens to be Superman's partner, Lois Lane, who can be rescued from this burning building in the first area of the stage. And last but not least, the mini-kits for this particular world are the exact same design as the ones featured in the LEGO Batman series. Reuse or homage? You decide. Regardless, they ultimately build this pie-throwing contraption of the Joker and Harley Quinn, which will become important later when going over the adventure world. There are also hidden areas located within every stage, with the DC Comics area in particular being accessed by swimming into this pool of water during the Two-Face boss fight in order to access a special area of Atlantis, completely with puzzles to solve specifically catered to Aquaman, it seems, seeing as his Atlantis ability can come in handy with a few of these obstacles. It's a fun area and a nice breather in between the action taking place in the rest of the level. It's just a little weird that they made it accessible during a boss battle of all places. But I think it's time we finally get to the adventure world now.
How is this possible? This is not your domain. You have no power here, Sauron the Deceiver.
Some lord! He didn't even have giant pants! No!
Ugh, why do these things always have to be so bright?
The DC Comics adventure world actually has a bit of story behind it, if you can believe it. Due to some catastrophic events, the cities of Gotham, Metropolis, and Atlantis have all gotten smushed together into one giant hybrid super city. Whether this was due to the events involving Lord Vortek during the main story or another potential dimensional rift, I'm not entirely sure, but regardless, here we can see that plenty of iconic locations from all three cities are present and accounted for. Gotham's very own Arkham Asylum takes up space in the bottom left corner of the map off on its own, home to a variety of criminals and thugs that are held there, usually imprisoned by Batman himself. Not too far off, there's the LexCorp building, home to Lex Luthor and his menacing business, although ironically it is located directly across the street from Wayne Tower, held by competing business owner Bruce Wayne of Wayne Enterprises. Heading up the road also takes you past Wayne Manor, which is home to Mr. Wayne, although little do most people know that the Batcave also lies directly underneath. The Daily Planet is also a pretty recognizable location, seeing as it is the newspaper that Clark Kent aka Superman writes for, and last but not least, Ace Chemicals takes up the northeast portion of the map. All in all, I'd say it's a pretty good hodgepodge of recognizable areas. Would have been cool if there was something like the Hall of Justice in there too, but overall, I'd say it's a pretty good representation of DC. Now, as will be the case for all of these adventure worlds, I will be tackling the quicker objectives first, as they are far easier to go over compared to some of the bigger mainline quests that exist. That said, red bricks can be obtained right at the starting portal of each adventure world, and can usually be obtained just by chasing down the not Expo robot in a land vehicle, preferably one with its speed upgraded. You're given roughly 30 seconds from the start of engagement to chase it down and acquire it, which has yet to give me any trouble thus far. This red brick in particular unlocks the DC Captions ability, which adds comic book pop-up graphics and sound effects whenever you punch an enemy and deal damage to them. This doesn't necessarily enhance the gameplay experience in any way, but it is an amusing gimmick if you want the DC Comics adventure world to feel even more comic-like. Red bricks can also be purchased at the main hub inside Vorton. I think I forgot to mention that. Since we're in the DC Comics adventure world, allow me to make a brief tangent really quick and talk to you about the best stud grinding spot in the entire game that I know of. Now, first things first, if you are able, be sure to go out of your way to acquire the following red bricks before doing this: Dwarf's Bounty, Mathematical, Akio Studs, and One-Eyed Willie's Treasure. I've also gone ahead and listed where each of these bricks can be acquired for your convenience on screen. However, I personally will not be covering them in detail until I get to their respective franchises. Regardless, if you can unlock and purchase all of these red bricks and then travel to the DC Comics adventure world, you will be able to amass millions of studs in no time at all. I will be showing you where you can do this when we get to the appropriate location not too far from now. But until then, there are several other locations present in the adventure world as indicated by these little tools icons where you can donate your studs to various NPCs in order to build or rebuild structures. These renovations, as they're called, are basically a way for the player to spend their studs in order to gain access to more gold bricks, and I will briefly be going over all of them here next. They do count towards your progress for 100% completion, so you need to pay for all of these in each adventure world if you want to complete the game. The DC Comics adventure world contains a total of 9 individual renovations present within it, adding up to a grand total of 475,000 studs that you will need to spend in order to obtain all of the associated gold bricks that come with. As we will continue to see in future adventure worlds, these tend to relate to iconic locations or symbols that pertain to the particular media franchise in question. In the case of DC Comics, these renovations include restoring the Golden Superman statue located directly outside of the entrance portal. There are also renovations present to restore the Daily Planet, the local newspaper headquarters located in Metropolis, the Penguin's hideout, a prominent Batman villain, although this one in particular comes across as a little silly to me given how small it is, especially because you can blow it up right after you restore it. There are 2 renovations located deep underwater in Atlantis, one consisting of an Atlantean building and another in which Aquaman generously donates his money to his local school of fish. A renovation is available to restore Gotham's bat signal, as well as another to help fund the Wayne Manor house party.
You won't regret it.
And one more renovation is present in which the player can restore Arctic World, which leads to a pretty interesting gold brick puzzle. Speaking of which, it is worth noting that there are some gold bricks in character missions that will not become available until after certain renovations are purchased, so keep in mind that some of these cannot be ignored if you're going for all of the character quests, but not necessarily 100%. And then of course, there's the jukebox, last but not least. Now, the jukebox is a recurring renovation that is present in every single adventure world in the game, so this is more of a stapled renovation one can expect to encounter very frequently. In purchasing it, you unlock the ability to listen to any song you have unlocked in the game, allowing you to listen to different songs while flying through the entire adventure world. This is a pretty cool optional feature that I appreciate for being made available in the game. However, I personally do not see myself using this very much as I continue to play through the rest of Dimensions. I would much rather experience the soundtrack of each location instead to get a more varied experience rather than personalize it to my same couple of franchises. I do, however, want to note that the jukebox is located inside Arkham Asylum, which anyone familiar with LEGO Dimensions will recognize as hosting what is hands down the best grinding spot in the entire game if you have the right setup ahead of time. That's right, this is the spot I was referring to a few moments ago. If you've been paying attention to this footage and wondering how I managed to acquire millions of studs so easily, it's because of this little trick right here. So, as I mentioned earlier, if you can acquire the proper red bricks in the corresponding adventure worlds, you can pull this grinding trick off in a matter of minutes. All you need to do is travel to the list of adventure worlds and acquire their corresponding red bricks, then of course make sure you have enough studs to purchase them. It's why I recommend buying the Dwarf's Bounty brick first so you can earn studs twice as fast, and then going for the rest. After these bricks are acquired, simply stop here at Arkham Asylum inside the DC Comics Adventure World and purchase the jukebox. Equip all of the red bricks, hop in the Batmobile, and fire away at the infinitely respawning enemies to get your combo up to a maximum of ×10 studs. This stacked with the ×2 and ×4 multipliers will result in a net yield of a ×80 multiplier on top of the boatloads of studs that each enemy drops thanks to the mathematical red brick, and you have a wider range of picking them up thanks to the fourth ability. Voila! Instant millions of studs just like that, and you're set for the rest of the game. I don't quite know how many studs the game expects you to collect in order to spend for 100% quite yet, but I intend to calculate that towards the end of this series just to see how ridiculous it could possibly be, not counting the optional vehicle upgrades. So yeah, there's a nifty tip for you if you find yourself running low on studs trying to purchase everything at any point in the game. Do be aware that doing this, however, will completely break it, so if you're kinda concerned with some level of difficulty challenge and balance, I would recommend avoiding this strategy. Me personally, I'm trying to make an in-depth series covering every single aspect that I can, so I kinda need it to help me out.
Now, these Gotham goons have a certain gritty charm to them. A certain kapow that you just don't get in Metropolis.
She's saying we don't take baths.
Why, that time Batman threw us in the lake on his back.
Now that the renovations are out of the way, let's go ahead and get into the main quest lines that are available to play in the DC Comics Adventure world. There are 5 different missions available to experience, and any of them can be played in any order you wish. Well, to an extent. As with all adventure worlds, these quests are given to you by various NPCs usually related to the media franchise in question for you to be able to complete and earn a gold brick in return. I will be going over these in a randomly picked order, so just because I cover a bankless task first doesn't mean you have to do it first in the adventure world. They are all available simultaneously in the open sandbox environment, so you can absolutely play one over the other and it will not matter. Unless, of course, you haven't purchased the required renovation yet for the missions that need that done first before becoming available. Other than renovations and main quest lines, the remaining gold bricks can be earned either through races, which there are 4 of in the DC Comics Adventure world, or scattered about somewhere in the level. These could be simple puzzles such as this one where you have to deflect lasers with Wonder Woman's bracelets or any character that can do so in order to turn off this system. Another might require you to mind control a civilian. Another may require you to perform an acrobat challenge. It can honestly vary from location to location, and I'm not going to be creating an all-encompassing guide for every single gold brick in the entire game because I feel like that would get very boring to watch. Instead, I'm solely going to be focusing on the NPC quests as well as the renovations and any other gold bricks that I particularly find interesting if I encounter any while I am playing through the world. Besides, I don't want to have the entire game spelled out for you, so there's no reason for you to experience it for yourself, you know? But enough about that. The first quest available in the DC Comics Adventure world is called a Bankless Task and is given to you by Commissioner Gordon. In this quest, Commissioner Gordon asks you to go around and grab the various money items that were stolen in a recent bank robbery that had occurred down the street.
Good news is we managed to intercept another bank robbery. The bad news is one of our rookie detectives heard intercept the truck as blow the truck up, scattering the stolen goods all over the place. So, if you see any unexplained riches lying around, do the honest thing and hand them in, will you?
These money items are located in the nearby vicinity, and it is your job to locate and return them to the Commissioner. And luckily, the items aren't too hard to track down and are being held by people claiming not to keep it for themselves.
I earned it.
Yeah, that's right. Selling cookies.
Sure, a likely story. Commissioner Gordon, by the way, is a noteworthy NPC for being the main police commissioner that interacts with Batman inside most of Batman's individual films, comics, TV shows, etc., etc. In this game, he is voiced by Steve Bloom, the same voice as Bane. The second quest in the DC Comics adventure world is given to you by none other than Lois Lane, Superman's female love interest.
This is Lois Lane reporting for the Daily Planet. Devastation literally shook the streets of Metropolis as unknown circumstances saw our fair city bizarrely spliced with Gotham City.
In this quest, she tasks you with guiding her and her cameraman, Jimmy Olsen, another prominent DC character, as the two of them go through the combination of Gotham City and Metropolis to report on them live on the news. During this escort, you are going to be tasked to defend the characters by beating up bad guys at various points along the way, and you will be able to see a lot of the sights that are iconic from both the locations. This is also the first quest that I played, and I would also recommend playing this quest first before any of the others as well, because it serves as a pretty good guide to kind of establish the general adventure world feel and where many of the prominent locations you will be visiting are. It was kind of a happy coincidence for me, but definitely recommend that. The main stops that Lois Lane makes include the Arctic Zoo, LexCorp, Arkham Asylum, and Ace Chemicals. The third quest available in the DC Comics adventure world is called Brawls Without Borders and is given to you by none other than The Flash, voiced by Charlie Schlatter.
As if one city's worth of dirty streets to clean up wasn't bad enough, now we've got two to deal with. Luckily for the good people of Gothamtropolis, it's a cool name, right? Yeah. It's either that or a full-on power couple name like Gothless or Medum or, yeah.
Or Schlater. I'm sorry if I'm butchering any of the names in this video. I don't know every single one of these people. I apologize for any mispronunciations. Now, I believe this is the Barry Allen Flash, and the mission he gives you is a pretty straightforward one. Basically, you need to go along with him running throughout the environment and beating up bad guys along the way. It's a relatively simple quest that doesn't have a lot of effort put into it, and if I'm being perfectly honest, you basically just follow him around as you fight off the various big groups of bad guys. I don't really have much more to add to this one. It's cool to see the Flash though. The fourth available quest in the DC Comics adventure world is called Rolling in the Deep, which is most likely an intentional reference to the popular Adele song of the exact same name. This quest is given to you by Perry White, a prominent DC Comics character who is located in the northeastern location of the adventure world relative to where you come out of the portal.
Now listen, this city mix-up story is big, but every good journalist knows the real scoops are the ones lurking beneath the surface. In this case, literally. I'm talking about Atlantis, the underwater city.
In this mission, he tasks you with going down to Atlantis to rescue the various reporters that he sent underwater to initially investigate the area for a newspaper that he is currently working on. This is a prominent quest because it will require you to have a character that can dive underwater, seeing as the entire location of Atlantis in the adventure world is completely submerged. If you do not have characters that can dive, you will be unable to access anything below Gotham and Metropolis, so that is something you definitely will need to keep in mind. I actually really like the Atlantis area of the adventure world though. It's a pretty cool city to get to explore, and I love the idea of it being underneath Gotham and Metropolis. Having the three most iconic cities of DC Comics all blend together into one is a pretty interesting concept for the world overall. And that leaves the fifth and final NPC quest of the DC Comics adventure world, called Servant and Protect, an obvious play on Serve and Protect, as you'll find with many of the quest names in LEGO Dimensions.
I was giving the Bat computer its weekly spit and shine and couldn't help but notice the radar picking up a number of incoming hostile vehicles.
This one is given to you by none other than Alfred Pennyworth, aka Bruce Wayne's butler, aka Batman's main assistant inside the Batcave, which you can actually access from two different points. If you go to Wayne Manor, which is located in the Gotham section of the adventure world, and go underneath the waterfall that is located around back, you'll be able to go through and access the Batcave from that point. However, you can also access the Batcave by going down into Atlantis and swimming up into this very, I don't want to use the word obscure, but it's definitely hard to see, spot where you can swim up and into the water that is at the bottom of the Batcave. I actually really love this design choice. It's cool to have some interconnection there. There's quite a lot of different things to explore and experience in the DC Comics adventure world, so with this being the second world that I've ever really gotten to witness, this was a lot of fun. Anyways, with this question in particular, Alfred notices that there's a lot of hostile vehicles located around various points in Gothamtropolis. The objective of this mission is to go ahead and rescue all 3 civilians that are being surrounded by the various vehicles on land, water, and air within a reasonable amount of time, although there's certainly no time limit. There's a raft floating in the water with 5 boats circling the citizen, there's another located around the Daily Planet where some flying vehicles are currently buzzing around the citizen, and last but not least, there are some thugs in this area of the DC Comics adventure world where you will be able to defeat those on land and rescue the final citizen. Fun fact actually, when I was recording footage for this game, this mission ended up crashing on me and completely stopped everything in the dust. So I'm not sure if that's a consistent problem or if it was just a weird one-time thing, but I do intend to report on every single crash or glitch if I ever experience any more in LEGO Dimensions when I witness them, because it's definitely something worth pointing out. I'm not sure if this is specific to the mission or the game as a whole, but it was definitely worth acknowledging. In order to unlock this quest, however, I do need to note that you will have to complete the Daily Planet renovation first before you will be able to take this from Alfred, otherwise he will not give it to you because there is nowhere for the Sky Citizen to spawn. One final thing that I want to mention about this DC Comics adventure world is the gold brick involving the mini kit. Now, this is true for all of the adventure worlds that are somehow tied to the Year 1 story mode levels, because all of the mini-kits that you can gather throughout the main campaign end up building a contraption of some sort that can be used in the adventure world to obtain one of the gold bricks. Ergo, not only do you need to collect 10 mini-kits in every level for a gold brick, you need to then use the mini-kit in a particular adventure world to get another one. In this case, the mini-kit figure that correlates to DC Comics is this pie-throwing contraption of the Joker and Harley Quinn, which you can use on top of one of the skyscrapers in order to shoot pies at these enemies, knock enough out, and obtain the gold brick. I will be acknowledging the mini-kit gold brick as well for all of the other adventure worlds in Year 1, so I just wanted to point that out now. Ultimately, I can say that the DC Comics adventure world was an overall positive experience for me. While I think that some areas of the environment seemed a little less interesting than others, Atlantis, the streets of Gotham, the Batcave, and Arkham Asylum were all really fun to visit and explore. Of all the DC Comics characters that are available to play as, I find Wonder Woman to be my personal favorite, although Superman and Supergirl are both pretty useful characters as well. And Aquaman definitely had his functionality in the underwater city of Atlantis for sure. I can't speak too highly of the Joker and Harley Quinn, and especially Bane, and looking at all of the upcoming team packs that were released for the game, I could probably go out on a limb and say that those two are some of the worst ones that aren't worth getting, especially since they're not required for total game completion. Cyborg seemed pretty alright, although I didn't love him. Green Arrow was a completely unnecessary character that didn't even need to exist, and honestly, despite all of the representation that DC Comics got, I can only really recommend 3 of the 10 characters. Even Batman, other than being required for story mode obviously, isn't all that great for free play mode, seeing as he only has 3 abilities and Wonder Woman can use the boomerang and grapple ones just like him. Stealth is also carried by other mandatory characters that we will address later, so he's practically obsolete in all honesty. The Batmobile actually has more uses than him once you get into more characters, especially with that second upgrade allowing it to pull certain walls down. Plus, let's face it, having the ability to fly is super useful and invincibility is just kinda broken, which is why I don't intend to play as them too often now that this world is complete, since I would still like a bit of a challenge here in the game. But still, if I ever need to clear out a room of things fast, I will just switch to Superman and walk through everything. All in all, I can definitely say that the DC Comics content is satisfactory. I would definitely consider playing through this adventure world again in the future, despite not being madly in love with it. But that about wraps things up on that chapter, so next we will be shifting focus to the second prominent franchise that is activated by default for purchasing the starter kit, The Lord of the Rings. Tune in next time to see me follow Gandalf through the multiverse to Middle-earth, where we will see what adventures unfold there. Until next time, Shadowstreak, signing off.
I have fallen through light and shadow, but I must say it wasn't any...